Hello, Dr. Symko here with another movie about our nervous system on being human. This one is about the brain, and the brain is a very complicated structure, so we're at part one. So let's get started.
The brain is a part of the central nervous system, as we discussed before, and it is protected and housed by a bony structure called a skull with a lot of places where nerves can come out of and communicate with the rest of the body. Now, the brain has several parts to it, and in this video, we're only going to talk about the 5 lobes that make up the major part of the brain. But there are other parts that we're going to discuss in other videos. And these other parts are the cerebellum, the basal ganglion, the brain stem, and the hippocampus. Now, there are several ways you can look at the brain, or several directions you can look at the brain, and it all depends upon what you want to see. So let's go through the different directions. One is to look at the brain from the top. Another one is to look at it from the bottom. Also looking at it from the left-hand side, looking at it from the right-hand side, from the back, and then from the front. And also slicing it, just like we did with the spinal cord, slicing and looking inside it. Now, it is important to look at the brain from all sides because it helps us understand normal brain function. What I mean by this is if you know where the structures of the brain are, you know how they relate to one another. Because the closer structures are to each other, the more likely they will react or interact with one another. Now let's look at the brain from the left-hand side as we go through the 5 major lobes of the brain. Now you could just see 4 on the surface of the brain, and this is just to orientate you towards left side of brain where the front is where the frontal lobe is, makes sense. The back is where the occipital lobe is. The bottom is other parts of the spinal cord and the cerebellum, which we'll discuss later. And the top, you'll find the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. The temporal lobe is below all those two and is on the side. So let's go on and have a closer look at these lobes and see what they do. Let's talk about the frontal lobe, which is where your forehead is, basically. To about the middle of your head. The frontal lobe is responsible for thinking, decision making, and planning. So you use your frontal lobe every single day. Even when you're sleeping, your frontal lobe helps you dream and sort of organize your thoughts for the day, the next day, or the thoughts that occurred that day. Our personality is also formed in the frontal lobe, depending on the kind of individual you are, is housed in the frontal lobe. And in addition to all this, the frontal lobe is necessary for speech, which is without fault and is very meaningful, so that you could speak with sense. It also can be involved in smell, which we will discuss later. Now, the parietal lobe is behind, towards the back of the frontal lobe, and you could see it from the side and also from the The parietal lobe deals with all the sensory information such as taste, temperature, and touch. So it has information coming from your tongue, from your skin. The parietal lobe needs to be able to process sensory information within seconds. This information needs to be integrated. In other words, putting information together to help the brain make a decision. The parietal lobe also helps you know where you are in space, as well as where your body parts are. Another important function of the parietal lobe has to do with your balance. The temporal lobe is basically located on the side of your head, around where your ears are. And again, things are closer to where their function is. The temporal lobe processes auditory information from the ears. In other words, it processes sound. The key to the temporal lobe functioning is selective listening. In other words, if you're in a crowd of people and you're trying to have a conversation with other individual, the temporal lobe's able to tune out everybody else and concentrate on that one person you're talking to. So it receives information like sounds and speech and makes sense of it all. It puts it all together. It helps us understand what is being said and what the sound is. The occipital lobe is found in the back of your head, just above your neck, and it is responsible for processing visual information, obviously from the eyes. The occipital lobe is important in being able to correctly understand what your eyes are seeing so you can recognize it. And they have to be very fast in order to do this. The occipital lobe makes sense of visual information so that we can understand it, along with sound, along with feeling, and we can make a decision in our frontal lobe about it. Now, the most misunderstood or not completely understood lobe of the brain is called the insular lobe. Now, the insular lobe is found deep within the brain underneath the temporal, parietal, and frontal lobes. And it processes what we do know, and we don't know a lot about it, is that it processes information from our gut, from the digestive system, and it is processed by this lobe. And so they believe that the feeling of being sick when you see something disgusting or smell something disgusting might come from the insular lobe. Now, there are two words we need to define before we finish this video, which will help us in later videos. One is called hemisphericity. Hemisphericity is a theory of treatment. This is a theory that each side of the brain has its different likes and dislikes. For instance, the right side of the brain is all about analyzing things and making sure things are okay. The left side of the brain is all about getting things done as fast as possible. What this theory does, and when it is applied, it allows the individual to direct therapy that is specific to a side of the brain. It also helps explain symptoms of the brain. In other words, the right side is about shapes and sizes, and the left side is about what are things inside of things. If an individual has a hard time with space or where they are in space, that might actually be coming from the right brain. It's just a way of understanding how the brain works and how to treat it. We're going to talk more about hemisphericity later, but it's just to introduce you to the word here. The next word I'd like you to introduce you to is called diastasis. Diastasis is actually a very important aspect of the brain. Diastasis means it is a sudden loss or change of function in a portion of a brain that is connected to a distant but damaged brain area. As you can see there, the brain has many points of function and connection. So if one part of the brain is damaged, it can actually affect another part that wasn't damaged, but because of the information coming from the damaged area is reduced or altered, it can alter that other part, and that's called diastasis.
So there you have it. As you can see, the brain is pretty complex, and we just sort of scratched the surface of its functions. The next video will deal with what happens when there are problems with these 5 lobes. See you then.